It's your boy Life of Darius, aka Dre the Martian, and we are back. We're back today with listen, don't crucify me for this title. Right? I don't co-sign this title. And I don't know if Mr. Nayeti co-signs this title, but it did make me click on the video, so obviously it worked somehow. Today we're here with the Beach Boys are better than the Beatles? The Beatles? All right, let's get to it. Yes, we are here today on my second channel. I kind of explained what my second channel is going to be for on the Sid Barrett video I dropped on my main channel, but I'll talk about it a little bit right here. This channel is really just for like lore videos, kind of like the Helter Skelter video I did on the Beatles, like the Sid Barrett video I did, stuff like this, even stuff comparing bands, interviews from band members, people that were close to bands, documentaries, biopics. Now biopics, I don't know about biopics being on this channel, right? I might like put a clipped up version on this channel, but most movies and biopics can't go anywhere but Patreon, right? You can't just put the whole biopic on YouTube. That's just not how that works. But yeah, biopics, interviews, YouTube docs, tier lists, just general music discussion. You feel me? Like I might do like video essays, like, you know, them people that do the Kendrick Lamar Drake videos where they sit down for an hour and just talk about it with like pictures and images, like, you know, stuff like that, man. Like FD Signifier, right? I'll link him in the comment section below. He makes really good video docs. That's kind of what I want to get into at some point, but I want to learn more about the genre before I start doing real video docs. But that's the vision for this channel, y'all. Hopefully that makes sense, right? This is pretty much just everything that's not copyrighted, right? Anything that doesn't have copyrighted music in it, that's not an album that I don't have to sit down and listen to, break down, is going to be on this channel. It's much more of a casual environment. You feel me? Right, but all that to the side, we are here today with the Beach Boys Are Better Than the Beatles, the story of SMiLE. And somebody actually recommended this to me in the comments, but they deleted the comment, bro. Why you delete your comment, bro? I can't give you credit for recommending me this video, man. Hopefully you comment under this one, though, and then I'll show you the love and respect right there. But yeah, I think this serves more as a story of the making of SMiLE than it does shitting on the Beatles, but I don't know. I don't know until we actually watch the video. This could actually just be an anti-Beatles video. And don't worry, man, because he's anti-Beatles, I'm pro-Beatles, so I will be here to balance out the hate just a little bit if there is hate, okay? But hey, I'm definitely looking for recommendations on this channel for good YouTube channels that do videos like this, good docs, biopics, everything like that. So leave recommendations in the comments. I'm checking them out all the time, I promise you. But yeah, with all that being said, we're going to finally dive into the video. The Beach Boys are better than the Beatles. Oh, shit. Talk to me, Nayeti. Talk to me, brother.
The music of the 20th century holds an important place in the story of the evolution of music.
Most definitely.
It introduced so many ideas that we take for granted nowadays. For example, self-contained music collectives, i.e. bands, who control both the writing and playing of their music, the replacement of written down sheet music with recording technology as a primary source of record, and just a few instruments, guitar, bass, keyboards, and drums, providing as much texture, color, and volume as an entire symphony orchestra did in the preceding 4 centuries.
It's crazy for me, because me being new to rock, it's crazy how little instruments there actually are, but there are so many versions of each instrument that does different things and produces so many different sounds. It's kind of insane.
The slowly building achievements of the 15th century to the 19th century, compared with the rapid development of music within decades during the 20th century, is truly an astonishing contrast to observe. It's well established at this point that when one talks about the music of the 20th century and its most impactful artists, that conversation inevitably leads to the Beatles. Their impact and influence essentially functions as a center of gravity for all modern music, even up to this point. As a music school graduate, I can tell you, ask any professor, especially the songwriting and theory professors, and you will hardly hear anyone dispute the fact that, pound for pound, the Beatles reign supreme as the prima practica of modern music. But I want to propose an alternative history, if you will. There is, in my estimation, another band from Hawthorne, California that had a huge impact as well, but not for a series of unfortunate events, would have become the premier music group of the 20th century. That band is, of course, the Beach Boys. Okay,
break this down to me.
The album that would have done it, the never-released SMiLE. A brief.
That's not copyrighted, is it? Hey, Ati.
A wider smile.
I'm on your ass. Hold on. Some of y'all told me to get an ad blocker. An ad blocker for my videos? Me? getting the ad blocker and not supporting these great creators on YouTube? Right? You think I would do that? Nah, of course not. And y'all shouldn't do it either, man. Back to the video.
A brief obligatory introduction of both bands, in case you are not familiar.
I'm pretty familiar now.
The Beatles were a British rock group
You can do it, though.
formed in the late 1950s in Liverpool, England, consisting of the members John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr.
Big Ringo.
They got their start as scrappy kids playing Elvis and Chuck Berry covers, before moving over to Germany, slugging it out in clubs in Hamburg, and then returning back to
Y'all
England,
told me that them
cleaning
German
up their
songs on
appearance,
Past Masters,
and writing
it was
a
because of
bunch
their history
groundbreaking songs
in
that
Germany.
changed culture irrevocably.
So that makes sense.
And led to an
I still hate those
epic-shifting
songs, but
perception of what
makes
music
sense.
could be, etc., etc. You know the rest.
All right.
And if you don't, there's a ton of great Beatles documentaries, too many to list, but I'll leave a few in the description. The Beach
Shit, I
Boys were
wanna watch
also
all
a
of 'em.
band formed in the late 1950s by a group of brothers, Carl, Dennis, and Brian, from the Wilson family, along with their cousin Mike Love
Real
and
Americans.
friends Al Jardine
Real
and David
Americans.
Marks. They initially put out their early records before the Beatles and specialized in a more stripped down surf
So they started
rock,
before the
some
Beatles?
might even say pre-punk style of music, in contrast to the British beat music of the Beatles. However, as they progressed, they expanded their sound to include doo-wop, vocal jazz, and R&B
Doo-wop.
influences,
I love
before
doo-wop.
ultimately releasing the world-changing Pet sounds, and
Ugh.
then subsequently slipping into a series
Amazing
of functional
album,
album
bro.
releases and touring, or rather non-touring, cycles before ultimately emerging in the late 1970s as a nostalgia act and riding out that appeal until current day. The Beatles throughout the 60s continued ascending the stairway of greatness to the hallowed halls of musical immortality, whereas the Beach Boys were great for a time before ultimately declining into irrelevance and boomer pastiche, and now are an
Damn.
embarrassing reminder of what could have been, and it's best if they are more or less not talked about. And
Dang.
that's how the story has gone up.
That's
until
what's going on with the Beach
but as I
Boys?
said at the start of this, I want to explore an alternative view of history, one that looks very different to the version we currently experience now, hinging on what would have happened had SMiLE been released in 1967.
Okay, we're doing a what
instead of
if.
2011, as it was in this timeline. However, before we do that, and don't worry, it's coming, it's important to look at the unique musical and sonic qualities that separated the Beatles and the Beach Boys from the outset.
Are we geeking
so
out?
We can better
Okay, let's geek out.
understand how they ended in the distinct musical destinations that they did. The first point we need to touch on when it comes to comparing the Beatles
Don't
and
make
the
me
Beach
mad,
Boys
Haiti.
is their different methods of production. Firstly, to note in this department, the Beatles consistently throughout their career had an exterior person in George Martin who handled the production direction on their music to varying degrees. It could be
I gotta
small
give more
things
love to
from
George
mere
Martin on my next
suggestion
Beatles
on
reaction.
changing the
I
form
for
of the
sure.
song, to bigger things like entirely rearranging, reharmonizing, and reorchestrating a piece.
He's
On the other
he's
hand,
the key.
from the beginning,
He's slick the key.
Brian Wilson was both musical and production leader of the Beach Boys. Even from their early garage days, Brian Wilson single-handedly directed production on everything, from choosing specific orchestrations to arranging songs.
Yeah, I was telling me that in the
Brian
comments.
Wilson did it all, and he did it all by himself.
He's
Now,
probably more
in
of a
terms
producer
the
than the other
sound
Beatles
of
were.
the production of both the Beatles and the Beach Boys, it's important to note the differences. As mentioned previously, because George Martin was in control of the Beatles' production, and admittedly, they were not really knowledgeable about the technicality of recording.
Yeah, these some regular
Their
dudes from
production
Liverpool.
style,
That
despite
makes
the
sense.
rapidly changing artistic flourishes
Like,
of
we just
their
know how to play these
career,
instruments, man.
remained rather stable. That is, isolated recording of instruments and vocals with a relatively dry, typical 1960s approach. While some might scoff at the statements such as the Beatles' production style remained the same for the entirety of their career,
Yeah, what you getting
it
at?
really is true. Though songs like an early banger such as Tell Me Why
Tell
and
me
later
why
songs like Strawberry Fields are
you
about as
cry.
radically different as you can get,
Facts.
they are still ultimately recorded the same way. Just listen to how, as crazy as Strawberry Fields is, you can still hear the cellos isolated from the chimes, isolated from the vocals, isolated from the guitars
That's
and
how they-
drums,
okay.
and so on.
That was their style.
It is a cacophony of sound for sure, but the approach is still essentially the same approach they would have taken to record 8 days a week. The situation was very different with the Beach Boys. While they too started...
Okay, so I think I peeped the point he's trying to make right there. He's saying, first of all, he was saying that while the Beatles are talented, they did have a head man, kind of Brian Epstein, kind of making sure that everything stayed the course. Right, it was a producer. The Beatles had somebody producing their music for them, while the Beach Boys, Brian Wilson was the producer. Right, he was doing everything for the band. But I see what he means by that. That's a good point. And I think he's also saying that the Beatles actually, even though their sound progressed, how they created music didn't actually necessarily change much from album 1 all the way to album 12, 13. Like they were still, I guess, more so isolating everything. I don't know why that's a bad thing. He's going to explain it to me in this video apparently, but that's how the Beatles were doing it. And okay, that's good. I see that's a good point. That's a good point. I got to see where he takes the point, but these are good points. Like, would you rather take a group of 4 really talented dudes that kind of need somebody to guide them to go to the level of greatness, or would you take a group of 7 dudes and one of them is really talented? Like, I don't know. It's funny, man, looking at these bands, like the dichotomies. It's kind of like it is in hip hop, like how Kendrick Lamar represents like Black Power, Americanism, things like that, and then Drake represents consumerism, like, you know, culture vulture, things like that. Like, it's kind of like that with the bands. Like, they represent different styles, like different, you know. So this is interesting to me. This is definitely interesting to me already. Let's keep it going, though. This is a long video. I can't do too much yapping, man.
While they too started with the standard isolation and separate miking of instruments, they quickly changed by the time of Little Deuce Coupe to heavily incorporate Phil Spector's wall of sound production technique. I won't get into the entirety of what the wall of sound and who Phil Spector was here. That deserves a
I've heard the name Phil Spector. Every time somebody mentions Let It Be, because the Let It Be reaction is coming up pretty soon, right after Yellow Submarine, they always mention Phil Spector in the wall of sound. Right, something about the wall of sound and how Phil Spector, I guess, fucked the album up. Right, so I guess Let It Be is like the only album by the Beatles that weren't produced by the Beatles and George Martin. Right, I guess that's what makes it stand out so much from the rest of their projects, and I can't wait to hear it. Right, I can't wait to hear. Like, I just want, like, what is the wall of, like, the Beatles on Beach Boys type of production? Is that what it is? I know it's not their type of production, but Beach Boys sounding, like, style production, that's interesting to me.
Here, that deserves a separate video. But basically, to describe the wall of sound in contrast to the Beatles' recording technique, with traditional isolating and miking, you want to be able to hear each instrument as an individual aspect of a greater musical whole. With the wall of sound, the goal is to fuse all instruments playing into one amorphous whole that is lush and fully filled out, with no one instrument able to be determined.
Brian Wilson with the sisters?
Hence the term
wall
of sound. With production differences defined, it's essential.
So wall of sound is pretty self-explanatory.
But yet very substantial differences in musical influences of both groups that would profoundly shape the differing approaches to psychedelia in Sgt. Pepper versus SMiLE. Firstly, the Beach Boys' influence of jazz vocal groups such as the Four Freshmen and the Four Aces were, and still are, eclectic.
Is them not the same groups? They look like the same exact people.
And it is apparent
Them gotta be the same people.
Early records of both bands that this is a demarcating stylistic difference just based on how the vocals are arranged on each record. To put it plainly, the Beatles' vocal harmonies are simple and sweet, akin to the Everly Brothers, nothing too complicated or out of the norm for an early 60s rock group. Vocals were sung in 2 or 3 parts and often never differed from the basic triadic building of harmony for the voice. Meanwhile, the Beach Boys took vocal arrangement and manipulation in a wholly different direction, which brought a distinct and unique sound that even to this day is considered a rarity. While many Beach Boys songs contain typical rock and roll harmonic structures not unlike the Beatles or many other bands of that time, their vocal arranging style was modeled on the aforementioned jazz vocal groups like the Four Freshmen and the Four Aces. This meant that while the Beach Boys often conformed to standard rock harmonic structures, the vocals placed on top were rich, jazz-based 4- and 5-part style block chord harmonies.
I don't know anything about these block chords, but I get what they mean by the jazz style harmonies. Because I was saying that a lot during the Pet Sounds reaction. Like, it's really jazzy. I've never heard much jazz on the Beatles.
It can be easy to miss, but what they accomplished in the early
on Magical Mystery 2 and Sgt. Pepper's, there was a little bit of jazz.
It's kind of amazing when you look at it, and consider how young they were when they did it. It's easy to see, starting with this unique approach, how it might influence more experimental work.
I gotta watch some Beatles live shows, man.
It's clearly
they kind of rare
here that there are some pretty distinct differences between these two groups. And throughout the early to mid 1960s, each group continued to hone their unique skills in the field of rock and pop. The Beatles continued tightening up their songwriting and close, simple harmonies, and with the help of George Martin, began incorporating new and unique elements into their production. In addition, of their own accord, they really began to take off as songwriters and visionaries of their works. It's been said a million times, but there really is no way to quantify how important it was that the Beatles initiated the viewing of the album as a full body of work that should be composed cohesively, rather than a ragtag grouping of songs that may or may not be of similar quality.
That gets lost on me sometimes too, y'all. That's another, like, I try so hard to consider context and time when I do these reviews, and I do most of the time. I think I show enough respect to, like, things like that, but man, it gets lost on me sometimes, like how important an album like Rubber Soul was. And I can kind of feel it just because I listened to all the Beatles albums before Rubber Soul, and if y'all see the Rubber Soul reaction, y'all will see I heard the difference immediately. What they were doing. I'm like, yo, like, this ain't Help, bro. Help is a great album. Had a bunch of spotty tracks. Beatles for Sale is Beatles for Sale. Right, Hard Day's Night, great album. Bunch of spotty tracks though. Same shit for With the Beatles, Please Please Me. Just like, the spottier tracks were just due to like how albums were made though. Like, we didn't have to go in and make sure all 14 of these songs were top quality. Right? We just had to make sure that like 4 or 5 of these songs were top quality, man, and we'll be good. But I'm saying the Beatles took it to that next level with Rubber Soul because these were 14 great, high quality, greatly produced, the melodies, the production, the warmness, the vibrance. Like, Rubber Soul is just, it is the beginning of everything, low key, bro. Everything modern music, bro. And it's the way music transforms so fast after going, like he said, from the 15th to the 19th century. Wasn't much development happening in music. There was, but it was very, very slow. And then something happened when Chuck Berry and Little Richard and Elvis and them dudes started shaking their hips, being a little more, a little more crazy. Like, something happened. It turned to the Beatles. And the Beatles turn into what we have today, man. Is that good or is that bad? I don't know, but it's not the Beatles' fault. And that's what makes them such a special, intriguing band. It's not only are they the guiding light, but they're a great guiding light. Like, normally the top influences in a lot of genres aren't really that respected. Like in hip hop, Run DMC would kind of, I guess, be what the Beatles are considered in rock. But Run DMC is not held in the same regard as the Beatles, bro. Like, as much as they did for hip hop, it's just not the same because the quality, like, the Beatles were just putting, just like they was working, bro. And the fact these were just 4 regular dudes from Liverpool, didn't even really know how to do any of that technical shit in the studio, bro. Still making hit after hit after hit after hit. Jesus Christ, man. That's enough Beatles gushing right there, man. But I just had to say, like, Rubber Soul, Jesus, bro. Anyway, back to the video, bro.
Songs that may or may not be of similar quality and may or may not have anything to do with one another. The Beach Boys, despite the high quality of their musicality, did not quite take up this visionary approach at the same time as the Beatles, and Brian Wilson knew this. Upon hearing Rubber Soul, he knew a change was needed to keep the Beach Boys relevant. His response to Rubber Soul was the now immortal Pet Sounds. Now, I feel like I need to take a breath.
That's a good response. That's quite the response, B. Will.
Because the breadth and depth of importance of Pet Sounds cannot be undercounted. And while this isn't exactly a video about Pet Sounds and its multifaceted innovations, it is important to note that its effects on form, texture, instrument choices, and recording techniques were unprecedented in almost every way in any genre at the time of its release. The release of Pet Sounds did not go unnoticed among the Beatles, and prompted them to push their creativity even farther, which resulted in the also important Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Like Pet Sounds, I am sure I do not need to go over the world-changing, epoch-shifting...
You don't, brother. Trust me, you don't.
But needless to say, its effects on recording and the studio as an instrument were
using
also
the studio as an instrument. That's a great way to describe it.
This, my friends, is where the story story usually ends.
Yeah.
Pet Sounds is released and pushes the ball forward almost infinitely.
And then the Beatles come
The
push
Beatles
that shit.
come along and
Like,
respond by releasing Sgt. Pepper.
Thank y'all for that
For a
inspiration,
brief
Brian
moment,
Wilson.
The two groups are seen as equals.
Thank you for the
but
inspiration.
With the Beatles' further innovations with the White Album, Abbey Road,
Yeah.
etc., they take the mantle as the true artists of their time, and the Beach Boys sputter and spin out, unable to cope with the success.
Who's this dude at the bottom, bro? He scares me.
This, my friends, is the story most of us know today, and continues to be perpetuated everywhere, from music academia to conversations among friends,
to my comment section,
to
Life of Darius comment
However,
section.
Today with this video, as I said before, I hope to, if not change your mind, offer an alternative perspective that has always been there, but due to the obscurity and dysfunctional nature of said perspective, it has remained hidden and not well known outside of a few obsessives such as myself. So
I'm here to listen. I'm here to listen,
The
Hayate.
nature of the Beatles Beach Boys relationships in the late 60s goes like this. Rubber Soul is released, then followed up by the Beach Boys with Pet Sound, and the Beatles then respond with Sgt. Pepper's. And that is what is mostly known, as I mentioned earlier. However, while the Beatles were working on Sgt. Pepper's, the Beach Boys were working on their follow-up to Pet Sounds, an album that to Brian Wilson was to be a collection of music that redefined what vibrations.
She's giving me
this album, or project, was entitled SMiLE. Due to the subsequent obscure nature of SMiLE, it is tempting to think that at the time in the late 60s, the project would have also been a secretive creative process that would have been kept from the public until it was ready for release. But actually, this was not the case at all. In fact, all of us are more than likely familiar with a piece from SMiLE that was actually released and hit #1 on the Billboard charts in 1966. A full year before Sgt.
Good
Pepper
Vibration.
This song was Good Vibration. While Good Vibrations is well known among most people today, and especially
Good Vibration was #1? That makes sense.
I really need to emphasize how amazing it was and how it showed the radical changes that were possible in contemporary studio music. It was referred to as a pocket symphony, a full year before
pocket
Strawberry
symphony.
Field. And if we explore the pseudo-sonata form-like structure of Good Vibrations, similar in many ways to God Only Knows, and look at the mixing of new instruments such as the theremin, organ, and guitar,
I know the theremin.
old instruments such as
Okay.
the cello,
I'm not completely
we
lost.
see the beginnings of a new idea of what constituted an orchestra that presaged innovations from late 20th century contemporary classical composers in many ways. When all of this was mixed together with Brian Wilson's modified wall of sound production, we start to get something that truly looks like it is pointing the way to a new style of music.
What happened though?
Not rock and roll, not classical, not contemporary classical, but some strange amorphous new music.
Yeah, I don't know how to describe SMiLE sessions.
All the best elements of all these together.
It's music.
And it is clear this
Sounds.
is not just my opinion in 2021. In 1966 and 67, many critics, based on both the commercial and artistic success of Good Vibrations, assumed that whatever the Beach Boys would release,
Oh, so it was some hype. It was some hype in the moment. Not reality TV.
which was SMiLE,
Fuck reality
would
TV.
change the world of music irrevocably and influence the direction of all future artists. And it is my contention that those critics were in fact right. Now, because of the effects of a series of events that occurred during the recording of SMiLE, it appears that this argument made at the time seems laughably wrong to some people today.
Not laughably. I'm not gonna laugh at you, IAT.
Turn that the Beach Boys have been prone to since the late 70s,
Cringe
it
inducing.
becomes understandable. Nonetheless, I will heretofore press my case as to why, had these troubles not befallen the group in the late 60s, our world of music would be so different in so
Okay.
many ways. In order to make such a bold claim as I am that the entire world of music might have taken a different turn, we need to understand what it is about SMiLE that even to this day is so radically different,
Break that down for me.
unique, and groundbreaking in its approach, especially compared to the contemporaneous work of the Beatles at the same time.
Hey, bro, you sure this not copyrighted, bro? Might have to cut this
Start
shit.
first with this. Its unique, one-of-a-kind take on, quote, psychedelia, unquote. Already with Pet Sounds, it was clear to most people that the Beach Boys' take on trippy or psychedelic music was very different than most
very
other artists
different.
of the time. Most artists of the 1960s considered psychedelia to be a series of distinct musical and production techniques. These included the use of Indian instruments in the context of traditional pop rock songwriting,
George Harrison.
the use of the studio as an instrument in very distinct ways, i.e. reverse echo, tape splicing, sound collages of found sound like spaceship noises layered on top of music, tape speed manipulation to produce twisted effects on vocals and instruments, early sampling, etc. And finally, lyrical content about going on a trip to the journey inside your mind, questioning the meaning of life, and in a more down-to-earth fashion, simply talking about drugs.
So pretty much Piper at the Gates of Dawn.
All of this
That's what that described.
The aforementioned isolated style of production, sectioning off instruments and vocals to achieve supreme separation of the musical elements. With those typical aspects laid out, it becomes clear upon inspection of SMiLE that the Beach Boys, and specifically Brian Wilson, had an entirely different take. On SMiLE, the distinctive Wilsonian take on psychedelia included an even more unique and refined version of his wall of sound technique, mixed with the incorporation of late 19th century Appalachian melodies and instruments, specifically heavy use of the dulcimer, banjo, and washtub bass. The revival of the ultra-obscure 1950s lounge genre of exotica, pioneered by people like Martin Denny and Les Baxter, and peculiarly Eden Abe. I've made a separate video about exotica that you should definitely check out if you want to learn more.
Dang, bro. Okay, hi,
the production of obscure styles of
we might be on this channel a little bit.
Including 20th century barbershop quartet style singing,
barbershop quartets,
harmony, and 16th century chromatic Renaissance style of vocal harmony. A revisiting of harmonic and melodic ideas in the style of the Great American Songbook a la Cole Porter. Use of Wagnerian leitmotifs to structure songs and sections of the album.
Okay, I understood the first three.
Forms,
these last two.
Chorus 32 bar AABA. Orchestration based on strict classical techniques, mixed with the aforementioned Appalachian instruments,
you can hear that,
and current-day pop
you can hear the classical
instruments
orchestration,
such as guitar, bass, drums, etc. It's clear from these attributes that the experience of listening to SMiLE is going to be a wholly different affair than listening to any other psychedelic record of the time. Briefly here, I'd like to go over and highlight how some of these characteristics stick out in the course of listening to the album. First, let's listen here to one of the four centerpieces of the album, Heroes and Villains.
Not this. I feel like I'm back in hell again.
This song, if you have not heard it, is a tour de force in unique and virtuosic vocal arrangement, orchestration, and the breaking of traditional forms in a contemporary setting of studio music.
Definitely broke traditional forms.
Is abandoned in favor of what appears to be an extended and slightly modified sonata rondo form. The song, as I mentioned, is just a glory to behold, and you should really listen to it over and over again to grasp.
It's definitely a glory.
One thing I want to highlight
is how
it plays the role of introducing what I will call the madness leitmotif, which subsequently appears throughout the course of the first quarter of the album. In the song Heroes and Villains itself, it appears as the B section of the aforementioned sonata rondo form. However, when viewed, as I mentioned, as a Wagnerian leitmotif, we can see its reappearance in the following track, Plymouth Rock.
This literally sounds like somebody losing their mind, bro. Like, there's no other way to describe this. Oh, okay.
When listening, I
He's putting it
cannot
together.
emphasize enough how genius, at least to me,
Yeah,
it is to be able to incorporate and modify the idea of the Wagnerian leitmotif into a contemporary setting and successfully deploy it coherently.
Yeah, like now I'm really thinking about it, bro. That background with the like you think, because coming off of Pet Sounds, like my mind would tell me that's just regular Beach Boy harmonizing, just them doing what they want to do. But there is nothing regular about this song, Heroes and Villains. There's nothing regular about this song, bro. And the whatever you're saying with this madness motif, I'm thinking it has more so to do with it literally sounds. If there was somebody in the 1600s who were making orchestras, who were losing their mind while they were making the orchestras, that's how Heroes and Villains, in the sample that he just showed us on Plymouth Rock, it would sound like this, right? It would sound like that. So I see I kind of get where he's coming from with that. I'm more of a audio learner than a visual learner. So I'm glad he put them examples right there to really tie that together for me right there. Because listen, this is not life of musical theory, right? There's no critical musical theory here, but I'm hoping at some point a year from now, after watching enough of these videos, learn enough about instruments, different techniques, sonatas, right? I don't know what a sonata is. I thought that was like a hotel. But yeah, that's like another reason I really want to do this channel is because when I listen to music, right, it's more so just listening to the music, enjoying the music. I'm not trying to learn what sonata this is, what percussion instrument this is, what key this is in. I'm not trying to do that, bro. It's a vibe. It's energy. Music is energy. Music is feeling. Music is not meant to be picked apart like that, at least on first listen, right? So that's why I think this channel will be really important, because I do want to learn things about the technical side of this music, bro. Like I want to, a year from now, when I hear a song, I want to be able to point out like, oh, this is in A minor key. Oh, this is he's using the percussion, the cello. That's a cello in the background right there. Like I want to be able to talk to y'all like that. So hey, it's just a journey, man. It's just a journey. I know there's a lot of y'all out there who love this side of the music, like not just like the drama and the drug addiction and stuff like that. Like this stuff is cool too.
And leitmotif into a contemporary setting and successfully deploy it coherently. I've made a separate video on Richard Wagner and his innovations.
The first concept album was made in 1876. Hi, I tell you what, I gotta look at his channel after this.
Studio-based music that has remotely
These
tried
some good
to
videos.
perfect this technique of having a recurring passage appear over the course of multiple album tracks in an album. It was just so unprecedented and world-shattering, it amazes me to this day whenever I play the first 4 tracks of SMiLE, how it ends up dissolving into a connected Wagner-like passage out of Die Valkyrie. Again, I cannot emphasize enough how absolutely virtuosic and wholly individual of an approach this was among the Beach Boys' peers and ever since. And it is not limited to this.
So he's talking about like them little transitions, the little harmonies they was doing at the end of the tracks.
A similar leitmotivic approach taken between the songs Look, Child is the Father of Man, and Surf's Up. A theme which I will call the child motif is introduced in Look, expanded upon in Child is the Father of Man,
oh, that sax,
which in some ways
bro.
itself
Them
functions
horns
as a prelude,
is crazy.
and is then finally built upon and transformed in the seminal Surf's Up.
Oh my god! Like this is hard. I peeped this and I didn't say anything about it. I wish I did. I noticed like when I was listening to Surf's Up how that little child, like that came up in Surf's Up. Like it was like towards the end, like you heard it in the background, and it was weird to me. But I wasn't able to make, like I knew it was connected somehow. I wasn't able to make the connection for real. So I'm tired of the man. It sounds way better on Surf's Up. It just, the soundscape is just so wide. Is that what the wall of sound is? I can hear the difference. It just feels bigger.
Melody concept unrelated to track listing and song running time. And on that note of the endless melody concept, I want to discuss what I view as the 4 pillars of SMiLE that I feel demarcate sections of the album and ultimately provide centers of gravity for the juxtaposed music around them. These are Heroes and Villains, Cabinescence, Surf's Up, and Good Vibration. While not all of these pieces contain the
best 4 songs
elements that I mentioned earlier, if one listens to the album, it is clear that these pieces serve as gravitational tent poles of progression, and often songs preceding and succeeding them are loosely connected, either thematically, musically, or lyrically.
What? Okay, that makes so much sense. So what he's saying is those 4 tracks, and if you watch my SMiLE Sessions review, I even said those were the 4 tracks that stood out the most to me. They felt like songs that could have actually made it on SMiLE, right? And now he's actually saying this, and I'm thinking about it. Like a lot, the songs that surround these like 4 major, what he would call pillars of the album, are really, it's like a story around each 4 of these tracks. Heroes and Villains is his own story, right? And then it has the Our Prayer intro, and then G, and then Roll Plymouth Rock. Like these are all kind of surrounding it, but they're all connected in a way. And it's the same for Cabinescence and Surf's Up. Like Surf's Up, I think Child is the Father of the Man, those children's songs, those songs came right before Surf's Up, right? Yes, Cabinescence. Cabinescence was surrounded by My Only Sunshine and Wonderful, right? Surf's Up was preceded by Look, Song for Children, and Child is the Father of the Man. So this child concept that he's talking about right here led into Surf's Up. And then on Surf's Up, they bring back the Child is the Man. And that's tough. That's tough. Look, he's using a lot of big words right here, right? So I hope it doesn't confuse any of y'all out there, because it's kind of confusing me for sure. But I see where he's getting at right here, and that's dope how the Beatles. That's dope how they did that, and the album wasn't even finished. Right, the concept wasn't even finished, but the concept that they were thinking of, it just sounds so crazy that you can't help but be interested in it. Like, it's just interesting what the Beach Boys are trying to do right there. But anyway, back to the video.
And each of these 10 polls demonstrates the fullest realization of the previously mentioned ambitions and intentions of the album.
It's like all the snippets build up into those major songs.
I think it is the strongest example of the album's Appalachian Wall of Sound pseudo-psychedelia approach. The song features a prominent banjo figure with a bizarre doo-wop sounding vocal from the group. The song later veers into a section based on a heavy fuzz electric bass, double-tracked with washtub bass, and an almost unintelligible lyric sung in a polyphonic style with early 20th century classical harmony, which is indeed a lot. A couple of the other songs surrounding Cabanescence contain a few of these aforementioned elements, but in my opinion, this song is the one that points the way to a whole new style of psychedelica. And the truth is, unlike some of the other unique things about SMiLE, this style here actually did manage to find its way into the mainstream by way of late 2000s indie rock. One could characterize quite a few Grizzly Bear tracks as sounding like they are cut from the same DNA as Cabanescence.
Hold on, bro, you out my range now, bro. I don't know Grizzly Bears. Perfectly. Doing, 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 doing. In this old house. This Grizzly Bear. Shout out to these young lads.
Besides the four aforementioned pillars of the album, if we explore SMiLE in all its essence, the distinct musicality shines in many places. In addition to the psychedelic Appalachia, the exotica influence towards the end of the album in pieces such as Wanna Be Around Workshop, Wind Chimes, and Holidays is explored and extrapolated fully. In case you aren't familiar with exotica, it's usually an instrumental form of lounge music, i.e. no vocals. But here Brian Wilson subverts that by adding traditional pop rock.
That song for children instrumental is nuts.
Over an exotica template, which of course
that song should not be for children.
Results in the very distinct one-of-a-kind take on psychedelica. And while I would never say I am done in terms of summing the musical content of SMiLE up, that could go on for a lifetime, I feel like I've touched on a few of the aspects of it that I think are groundbreaking in ways I have found nowhere else in contemporary studio-based music. It's worth going over again just how amazing some of the orchestration on the record is. Going back to the song Look, we get a style of orchestration that is almost entirely classical-based with few nods to contemporary rock-based harmonic movement. In fact, Brian Wilson's style of orchestration was often favorably compared to that of Percy Grainger, an Australian composer from the early 20th century who often re-orchestrated classic ethnic European folk songs into grandiose works for the concert hall. There really is nothing else to say. Like Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, Wagner's Ring Cycle, Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, the Mass in B minor, Sgt. Pepper, Led Zeppelin 4, etc.
Hey, I heard all those.
Any other great.
Am I tapped in?
You need to listen to SMiLE.
Am I one of y'all now? Yeah.
Without a doubt, in my mind, SMiLE's innovations are so unique and profound, they would have changed, or at the very least, significantly impacted the direction of popular music in the 20th century had the album been released in 1960.
It's just a bad taste around this album now.
In 1960.
It's definitely a bad juju.
It wasn't even released in the 20th century. In 2011, my first year of college, the SMiLE Sessions came out and changed my entire world and outlook of what music was and what it could be. And it showed me there was so much undiscovered country left to be explored. While the impact
that's how I felt just a couple days ago.
I have made is profound. It was the release in 2011 that made me ponder how different music in the past could have been had this been released at its intended date.
Yeah.
And what went wrong that prevented this incredible...
There's some beers in the background, Brian Wilson. I see. Brian Wilson's getting lit.
Making this video, it is currently May 2021, 10 years after I first discovered SMiLE, and also Mental Health Awareness Month. Now, I want to be very careful about how I handle this next section of the video. I don't know Brian Wilson personally, so I do not want to probe and prod at his personal life during the recording of SMiLE, as he has gone on the record, many times reluctantly, to speak about the personal pain and mental anguish he experienced during this period, and the
You don't like to
lingering
talk about it
negative
for real.
after effects that period had on him. So to honor him, I want to speak more generally here about how scrutiny of public figures in the latter 20th century was many times of a vindictive and destructive nature, and how our past disregard as a society for mental health should help us learn to never repeat these mistakes again. Nowadays, celebrities have so many platforms to speak out and share their truth and their side of the story on any given situation directly, and respond to negative media hit pieces. Through the power of Twitter, they can directly stand up for themselves and their self-worth. Heck, even from 10 years ago, there has been
That's
so
a double-edged
much
sword, though,
change in the
Hayati.
power
You
of how
gotta understand
social
that. That's a
media
double-edged
can
sword.
empower and help change our society for the better.
Like-
Needless to say, this was not the
Like,
case.
let's
in the
just
20s.
let's just be honest, man. Yeah, you can defend yourself, but the fact is that you kind of, with social media, you almost have to defend yourself every day. There's somebody talking crazy about you on a daily basis, and you can just pick up your phone and see it. You don't have to go find a newspaper. Yeah, you don't have to turn on their local radio station at the perfect time of the day, at the perfect time of the week. Like, you don't have to tune into the television station and seeing Dick Clark, whoever it was, I don't know who it was back then, criticizing artists, but Dick Clark talking crazy about you. I see what he's saying, whereas we're artists, even not just artists, athletes, entertainers, comedians, they all have a platform now where they can speak for themselves. And while there are positives to that, it is a double-edged sword, bro.
Was not the case in the 20th century. Oftentimes, if celebrities were having personal struggles, the media was quick to lambast and humiliate without a second thought.
That's how it is
Or
now,
in the
bro.
best-case
It's not really a
scenario,
difference.
Just be very invasive and provide unwanted scrutiny into their personal life and
Right.
artistic work. There was no sense that these people, or really people in general, were entitled to self-respect or decency. And time and again, we saw many beloved figures in the arts struggle deeply with this relentless scrutiny.
Of
It
course.
would result oftentimes in increased substance use.
We seen it with Sid. We seen it with Brian.
Or
We
in the
probably gonna
worst
see it.
case scenario,
Oh, is
the
that
end of
Jimmy?
their existence. And it happened
Not
far
Big Jimmy.
too often to mention. Looking
Jimmy
back
Hendrix
now,
on
we
the
can
way,
see how
by the
morally
way.
reprehensible the media was at that time. Now, theoretically, if there was a sensitive genius who happened to be struggling with any sort of mental health issue in the late 1960s, the media would have launched scrutiny after declaration after speculation, and we would now see that as abusive and unfair. However, at the time, it would have continued.
Would we?
unabated. And again, in
Hayati, bro, would we, bro? Like, what? Listen, we are in a world now where there's a culture and then there's always the anti to the culture, right? So if there was an artist like Brian Wilson that existed in this current climate, right? This sunshiny, bubbly, likable, like colorful dude who was clearly going through struggles trying to create his next project, trying to live up to to the standard he had just set for himself, right? There would be a section of people who would be supportive and would be like, yeah, man, take your time, do what you got to do. We understand mental health is important. There would be that section. But the fucked up part about the internet is that with that section, there's always going to be an anti that forms. Now there's going to be people like, Brian, man, shut up, Brian Wilson. What you sad about? You got all this money, man. Just make the album, bro. What is you and your feelings about? It's going to be people like that too. So it's like, I see what you like. I'm not trying to discount whatever Brian Wilson or any artist went through back then. With media being such a monolith back then and you not being able to respond to anything, like if somebody goes on the news station and says Brian Wilson is crazy, he's losing his mind, he can't make music, there's really nothing Brian Wilson can do to change that narrative, right? But if Hayate is saying right here that criticism was harsher back then, the artists dealt with more back then, I can't, I don't think I'm gonna co-sign that. I can't co-sign that, man. I love the point he's trying to make here. At the end, I'm gonna let him finish his point before I keep budging in and saying my shit, but yeah, man, you kind of throwing me off with this one a little bit, Hayate.
Genius who happened to be struggling with any sort of mental health issue in the late 1960s, the media would have launched scrutiny after declaration after speculation, and we would now see that as abusive and unfair. However, at the time, it would have continued unabated. And again, in retrospect, it is no surprise that this invasiveness would very likely derail an artist who was rendered fragile.
And here's the thing, he's talking about the media. That's the thing.
Especially if that artist
he's not talking about the
have a
fans.
supportive team of people around
The
him
fans
to
probably
help
now
him
are worse than the
stabilize
media.
himself among such an onslaught. Which brings me to my second point about why SMiLE's world-changing impact was denied to us. Mike Love. Now listen, I probably will never get backstage passes to any current-day Beach Boys concert
What Mike Love
due
do?
to what I'm about to say, but screw it. Mike Love was and is a conservative, toxic male douchebag with no taste and a hatred for true art.
All you need to do is just wait for Bernie. He's going to give it all free, so then you'll be fine. So you don't have to worry about a thing.
Team, it's been a grind.
This just took a turn. Let's go. Let's get messy. I'm ready to get messy. Hi, Tay. Let's do it. I'm ready to get messy.
I know, but I can confidently say having a toxic presence constantly around you, berating you, second-guessing you, and criticizing every move you make, while at the same time contributing almost nothing, will have a negative effect on a person. Whether that person is struggling with mental illness.
Damn, Mike Love!
As I said, despite Mike Love's brief dalliance with transcendental meditation, he was both musically and culturally during the 1960s a conservative, pushing against the musical and cultural ties
Mike Love, you
in a
can't be
way that
conservative
was
in the
sharp
Beach
contrast
Boys.
to basically every other artist of that era. Literally. This was a man who thought in 1968 that the right thing to do would be for the Beach Boys to return to a late 1950s, early 1960s surf rock.
He ain't like that psychedelic shit.
Success, which shows that not only was his artistic
Is that Mike Love?
permanently off,
What?
even his self-proclaimed commercial smarts were a joke as well. Every time Brian Wilson excitedly pushed the Beach Boys to explore the new terrain he was creating for them in his mind, Mike Love pushed back in a typical toxic male chud-like fashion, ranting about drug culture and how he didn't want to be
He's one of
associated with
those.
the hippies.
No, Mike
Yes,
Love.
a member of a popular 1960s rock group in his late 20s really
Said he doesn't want to be associated with the hippies.
lyrics on Pet Sounds were reportedly even
L
changed
marketing.
due to Mike Love's inference that there were references to drug culture on some of the songs. This constant battle was clearly a source of supreme dysfunction in the Beach Boys in the late 1960s. We can definitively say that Mike Love's constant close-minded pushback took a toll on Brian Wilson's self-confidence.
it would do that to anybody.
And
Yeah.
undoubtedly contributed to the collapse of the SMiLE project. And it wasn't just Brian Wilson. Throughout the SMiLE recordings, it is well known that Brian Wilson was collaborating heavily with one Van Dyke Parks. Now, Van Dyke Parks really deserves his own video for how unique a life he lived in music, but basically, like Brian Wilson, he was a musical polymath of the highest comport. And he and Wilson ended up writing quite a few groundbreaking pieces of music together, including the aforementioned Heroes and Villains.
I'm listening,
And how do you think Mike Love took to that? Take a guess. Van Dyke Parks ended up leaving the SMiLE project as a
Let me guess, he was hating.
And I am sure it is in no small part due to Mike Love's constant berating of him, Brian Wilson, and the music they were making together. Now, as much as I am anti-Mike Love, I am old enough now to learn that the world is made up of shades of gray.
Yeah.
And to blame the entirety of the collapse of the SMiLE album on him, or the media, or Brian Wilson's alleged struggle.
Some of it might just be Brian Wilson.
Trying to nail
Like, let's
it
just
down
be
to
honest.
the
He
source
might.
is not the way to approach it.
Most lot of it is on him.
Life is complicated, messy, and chaotic, and nowhere more than in the world of the arts. However, it is important to note that all this aforementioned dysfunction that was going on in the Beach Boys was definitely not occurring in the world of the Beatles. While the Beatles surely had their share of dysfunction as well in this period, none of it would become crippling until the dawn of the 1970s. And surely none of it was inhibiting.
This part gonna be
stop
tough.
them from
I don't know nothing about the Beatles
producing,
breakup.
and releasing
I just
an
know that they
album.
broke
That
up.
very reality forms the
I cannot wait to learn
crux
about
of
this
musical
shit.
existence up until this point. Because the Beatles were able to successfully record, produce, and release material in this key moment in time, this is the linchpin that propelled them to the top of influence and adulation. The release of Sgt. Pepper's and the shelving of SMiLE is, in my opinion, the definitive moment of the music of the 20th century and its course throughout history. I want to end this video with a thought.
Talk to me,
Imagine a
Tay.
world in which SMiLE was in fact released in 1967.
I'm imagining.
What would that world have looked like? What would Dark Side
Sunshiny.
of the Moon or Bohemian Rhapsody sound like? Would the idea of a Wagnerian uber melody become an adopted concept?
Do I
for
want Dark
sections
Side of the
of
Moon
albums?
to sound
Would the
like
Wall of Sound
Pet Sounds? I
production
don't know.
style have survived, thrived, and ultimately outshone the more common, still to this day, isolation recording approach?
No.
These are all questions that I have meditated on and continue to fascinate me in just how different some of our favorite records might have
The way the
sounded
Beatles fans were
had
shitting on the
SMiLE
Wall of
been
Sound
released
in,
independently.
in my
The
DMs,
truth
I don't know.
is, it wasn't released in 1967. It was released in 2011, and the world of music is as it is. So what are we to make of SMiLE, this seminal work that never was, but yet also was? I think it is important for all of us, musician or not, to ponder on the importance of self-determination in the face of opposition, and just how truly fragile we all have the potential to be when confronted with said situation. SMiLE could have been released. It could have. But it was not, due to these compounding factors bearing down on it. On a purely musical level, I think it is pertinent that we go back and rescue some of the obscure and fascinating ideas and concepts Brian Wilson was putting forward on
It's a little too late for that, I ain't gonna lie.
Music, this record has been an essential part of my creative process.
Oh, you make music?
SMiLE is vital. Thankfully, we were in fact able to experience it after all, despite the delay. Revel in its radiance and absorb its light. And now I am going to end on a very weird note for some of you.
Shit.
Bear with me. As a student of mysticism,
one
of the key areas I've immersed myself in is the study of spiritual alchemy. The symbolism of transmuting lead into gold as a spiritual journey from
gold is lead,
damaged humans into refined spiritual beings is very important to me. When I listen to SMiLE, I see the perfect example of musical alchemy. As I listen, I can hear, feel, and see Brian Wilson's journey of spiritual transmutation into an actualized form in music. No matter where you are in life, musician or not, I hope that as you listen to this amazing record, you too will see this transmutation, this turning of lead into gold, as a metaphor and hopefully an inspiration in helping you along with whatever journey you're on in life. The Beach Boys' album SMiLE is, to me, the greatest album of the 20th century, and we should all be grateful to have it.
I don't know about that one, brother, man, but yo, clap it up for IAT right here, man. Amazing video. I learned a lot from this video. Got a lot of context on just SMiLE and the history of the Beach Boys and the Beatles. I didn't know they was beefing like this. I didn't know it was that. So I guess they wasn't really beefing. It was just, friendly competition, right? All right, so that was Nayete. I don't know why I kept saying Hayate. I'm sorry. I apologize for that, Nayete. Don't pull up on me, bro. I don't want no smoke. But that was Nayete. The Beach Boys are better than the Beatles, and that wasn't really the genesis of this video. This video wasn't negative in any way or shape or form. It was just him. I could tell he was a really big fan of Brian Wilson and the Beach Boys. He loves SMiLE, and he made a great case on this video for the album. Right, speaking on like all the influences that Brian pulled for and how different his influences were than anything the Beatles could ever pull for, like early classical music, things of that nature. That madness concept he was talking about in Heroes and Villains and Roll Plymouth Rock, and kind of how the four pillars of the album, like every other song, all other 16 songs on the album connect to those four songs in some way. And those things, combined with the wall of sound technique, combined with just the brain of Brian Wilson, this album, like already in the state that it's in right now, I'm telling y'all, that's an amazing album. SMiLE Sessions, I bumped it. It's getting better to me with every listen. Y'all should go check it out too. But this story, there's so many layers to this story, man. Brian Wilson, Jesus. It's not like your regular rock and roll story. It's not drug addiction. It's literally just pressure, like critical pressure from your peers, pressure from your own bandmates. Mike Love was tripping on Brian Wilson. So this was an amazing video, man. I feel like I just learned a lot from this video, right? And it seems like Nayete has a lot of videos talking about the more technical aspects of music, and I definitely want to learn about those things as well. So we might be spending a lot of time on this channel. I don't know if he likes people reacting to his videos, but hopefully I showed the proper amount of respect, man, and showed him enough love on this one, man. This is just dope right here. Now, my opinion on like the comparison between the Beach Boys and the Beatles, for me personally, it's still the Beatles all day, every day. Like hearing everything he said about this album is amazing. It is, but it's just one album. And let's just be honest, bro. Brian Wilson wasn't able to come through with it. Like that has to matter for something. The fact that you can say all this was going on, the media, mental health, bandmates, all that. But the fact is, Brian, he was not able to finish this project until 2011. Right, so that you have to hope that has to be held against him in some way, shape, or form. But I can't discount the fact Brian Wilson dropped a record that was seen as seminal, seen as like this amazing record, new sounds, like the orchestra, everything was just so big and bold and large, and it's like the whole world was expecting him to do that, but better, right? And that's tough, right? I don't think the Beatles had to deal with like people wanting them to recreate what they did last. Like the Beatles, their thing was, hey, we're changing every album. We're doing something different this album. Like it ain't, whatever y'all heard on the last one, it's not gonna sound like that on this one. And I think if the Beach Boys were able to take more of that don't give a fuck style approach It would have been better, man, but that just might not be who these dudes are. Like, that might not be Brian Wilson's personality. Like, Brian Wilson might not be as headstrong as guys like John Lennon and George Harrison and things like that. That's just what it is, but yeah, that's going to be it for this video today. The Beach Boys are better than the Beatles, okay? If y'all know any other videos talking about SMiLE, talking about the Beach Boys, this little weird rivalry they had in the 60s that are better than this one, link it to me. I'll check it out, man. We're here to watch all type of videos. And yeah, Life of Darius, Dread of Martian, love y'all, gang. But with all that being said, I'm gonna bid y'all adieu. It's your boy Life of Darius, aka Dre Wilson, and I am Jesus Sandals, man.